Hey, it's Dr. Fox, and despite their keen attunement to emotions and energies, many highly sensitive people struggle with empathy, believe it or not. Now, this paradox reveals the complexity of the interplay between HSP, highly sensitive people, and the challenge of stepping into another's shoes. And that's what we're going to explore in this video. We're going to tease it apart. I'm going to tell you those critical components, and let's get into it. What are highly sensitive people? Highly sensitive people, these are individuals that experience an increased sensitivity to sensory input. This could be sounds, lights, textures. They also have a deep emotional response to events and things that are going on around them. This can often lead to emotional reactions because people that are highly sensitive people tend to have strong emotional reactions, and they can be deeply moved by art, music, or even personal interactions. This is where a lot of problems can come into play. But it's not just those emotional reactions. It's also environmental stimuli, which means stuff that's going on around them. They're affected by changes in the environment, and they can feel overwhelmed by busyness or even like chaotic stuff that's going on. So they could be overwhelmed easily. It's really important. And when we think about empathy, we're talking about the understanding of others, right? And it's recognizing and understanding the emotions of others, but also seeing things from their perspective. Now, emotional sharing, which is certainly a part of empathy, and this includes sharing in other emotional experiences, feeling what they feel to some degree. And what this can do is these two components, that understanding others and that emotional sharing, it can help with the connection to others. It can be really assistive because it can foster a deeper connection and relationships by allowing individuals to respond in a very compassionate way and in a more appropriate way to others' needs in most cases, but not all cases. And that's important to realize because highly sensitive people, because of that tendency to be overwhelmed emotionally, because of the expectation that because you're a highly sensitive person, you're going to magically know what empathy is and how to manage that empathy, the reality is it doesn't always work that way. So what we really have to look at, we have to understand certainly by overwhelmed by emotions. If you're a highly sensitive person, you know a highly sensitive person, they can be overwhelmed by emotions. And this can be those intense personal emotional experiences, and they overwhelm them. So their capacity to process others' feelings simultaneously, as well as managing their own, can be really, really difficult, and it can be really taxing. We're going to talk about ways to manage that effectively in just a little bit. And sometimes this feeling of being overwhelmed, this leads to what's called emotional saturation. Now, emotional saturation, this can be because they already feel deeply, adding that other layer of emotion from someone else can lead to this emotional saturation, making it really hard to maintain that empathy, also feeling overwhelmed, also maybe losing yourself within the context of the relationship or what you're talking about, very likely. Which is why highly sensitive people or people that are in their interpersonal circle, which you may be, they have to engage in self-protection. Now, highly sensitive people, sometimes they do unconsciously withdraw from empathizing fully. This is done to protect themselves from further emotional overload. And that can be a big, big problem for them because they get sapped, right? Their emotional battery starts to get sapped and they feel tired and overwhelmed. And this can lead to others perceiving them with a lack of empathy despite their inherent sensitivity, right? So it's paradoxical in some ways. It's that the highly sensitive person becomes overwhelmed, so then they have to engage in self-protection, and then that self-protection causes them to emotionally withdraw a little bit, so you feel this sense of distance and disconnection, and you're like, what's up with Sally? What's up with Steve? Right? And some people do internalize that. Some people internalize this experience and say, what's wrong with that? Boy, they must be really sad, depressed, uninterested, mad, whatever it is, because it can be outside of their usual character. And we have to understand the difference between empathy and sensitivity. And these are two very, very different things. While sensitivity helps that highly sensitive person notice and feel emotions deeply, it doesn't always translate into empathy. And this requires, or empathy requires, this balance of your own feelings and emotions with those of others. So you're sensitive to it, but the ability to connect, they're not the same. And we don't want to make assumptions that, well, if you're highly sensitive, then you of course have empathy. One doesn't always equal the other. 1 + 1, in this case, can sometimes equal 3. I mean, it could happen, absolutely. So we don't want to make assumptions. And we have to recognize, again, going back to that overload tendency. And there are challenges to highly sensitive people kind of managing their empathy. And let's talk about some of those challenges now. Intense personal emotions. And highly sensitive people experience their own emotions very deeply. Again, adding to the probability of being overwhelmed. This emotional saturation adds a layer of others' emotions that can lead and increase the probability of emotional overload. And that can be a huge problem. So it's like they're just getting bombarded with emotions, externally, but internally as well. So you feel kind of stuck, right? It's like you're stuck in this barrel, and you're in this barrel and you're wrapped around with emotions, but inside the barrel, maybe it's all this water, fish, gumballs, M&Ms, whatever they are, in the barrel. So that's filling up too. So you get it inside and you get it outside. And that can, again, drive to a need for self-protection. And this is when you have to avoid that emotional strain. Highly sensitive people may unconsciously withdraw. They're not always aware of it. They're not like, hey, my emotional battery is getting sapped. I kind of need to step out. Usually, they're overly compassionate. So they push themselves to connect to others. And that can be really, really problematic because they continue to drain that battery. Drain that battery enough increases the probability of anxiety, panic, depression, and other mental health concerns as well. So that self-protection can be really helpful to them. It's important to realize that as well. And balancing those emotions, that can also be a big challenge for those that are highly sensitive, which is finding a balance between their own emotions and empathizing with others. And it's finding that balance, but you have to have that intrinsic understanding of your own emotions. This is where that self-exploration can be really helpful. Working with a mental health provider can be really helpful. So it's so important to do that, to not only take care of yourself, but understand your level of empathy that you can tolerate as well as exhibit, but also how you can interpret and feel the environment around you as well as your own emotions. And a mental health provider can really help to do that, understand your emotions, but also can help teach you adaptive strategies to manage the environment. Because if you don't, you can go down a really dark road, just as I mentioned just a second ago. Some key takeaways before we get to ways to manage this is recognize that emotional regulation. You got to engage in self-care. You got to be able to manage your own intense emotions, reducing that risk of overwhelm. What does that feel like when you start to get overwhelmed? What is that like? Do you recognize, whoa, starting to really get tired? Like I have a friend, and when we're hanging out for a while and his emotional battery gets low, he'll say, you know what, my social battery's running a little low. I think I'm going to head home. Totally cool. We all expect that from him. But that's self-management. That's self-care. And you got to do that because you got to recharge your batteries as well. And you got to regularly engage in self-care. You've got to do those things because if you don't, it's just going to keep sapping you and sapping you. You've got to replenish that energy, which makes you more available to attend to the environment around you as well as the people that you're sharing your environment with. Stress reduction. Self-compassion reduces stress and anxiety. Absolutely. It's creating a calmer state of mind for better empathy. But many people confuse self-care or putting yourself first or your own needs first equaling narcissism. It's a completely distortion and misunderstanding of narcissism. Absolutely not the same thing. It's an apple and an orange, completely different, right? They're both fruit, which they're both personality aspects, but very, very different. Now, narcissism would be that you gain energy from taking from others, and to their deficit, highly sensitive people interpret those emotions and they feel things more deeply, totally separate. Particularly when we explain it, you're kind of like, oh yeah, that's not the same. So putting yourself as a priority may be harder for those that are highly sensitive people, but it is critical, because you also have to have those boundaries in place. And this is, you have to establish boundaries through your self-care when you need that, so you don't overextend yourself. Because if you overextend yourself, again, you're going to get sapped. It's going to put you on that dark road, going down that dark tunnel, depression, anxiety, panic, or other mental health concerns as well. And taking care of yourself as a highly sensitive person can also enhance your resilience. And this can come in the form of self-compassion, which is building up that emotional resistance, recognizing what you can tolerate, what you can't, even particular topics that may be really hard for you to hear about or deal with, or movies that are really disturbing, or friends that maybe are obnoxious or jerky or whatever. That can sap you faster. Understanding that and managing that can help you manage that resilience, and that can actually enhance it because you know who you're dealing with. You know what you're getting into, and that can be really important as well. And overall, improved mental health. This is good self-care. This maintains your mental health. This provides a strong foundation for that effective empathy, and not the empathy that wears you out, overwhelms you, causes you to pull back, causes you to feel that hypersensitivity is a negative. And it absolutely isn't. I'm going to put a video link here at the end of this video where you can look at what are the benefits of being a highly sensitive person. And there are a lot. And it's a good thing to be able to sense the world around us, but you have to be able to take care of yourself as well. That's really, really important. So please take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.